Sarah was living a happy life. She had completed her college degree in English literature and worked as an editor for a website that earned her a good income. Besides, she had married Albert, her high school classmate. Albert had liked Sarah since the 5th grade, but never confessed her feelings. But when Sarah started dating the guys from her college, he approached her. He asked Sarah out on a date, and she agreed. Sarah and Albert were highly compatible. They had the same interests and perspectives regarding relationships and commitments. After a year of dating, Albert proposed to Sarah, and she accepted. They both were happy to start a new chapter of their lives together. However, there was one problem. Albert's mother, Patricia. She wanted Albert to marry her friend's daughter, Elena. However, Albert was adamant about marrying Sarah despite his mother's disapproval. She tried convincing her son to change his mind. "Albert, Elena is prettier and smarter than Sarah. Plus, don't forget that Elena's mother is a doctor and Sarah's mother is a housewife." But Albert didn't care about superficial things. He clearly told his mother, "Mom, Elena is great, but I don't like her. I like Sarah, and I want to spend my life with her." Sarah and Albert married on a small wedding anniversary, and Patricia didn't attend. The new couple was happy to spend the rest of their lives together. Albert and Sarah tried numerous times to contact Patricia and sort things out with her. However, Patricia always said the same thing to her son, "Divorce Sarah and I'll forgive you." But Albert never even thought about leaving his wife. After a year of pleading with his mother, Albert gave up on her and focused on his life with Sarah. However, 2 years after their wedding, Patricia returned to their life. On Sunday morning, when Sarah and Albert were deep asleep, she showed up at their apartment unannounced. When Sarah opened the door, she was surprised to see her mother-in-law. She became conscious of her appearance. "Patricia, please, come in." Sarah welcomed her. Patricia looked at Sarah, from her messy hair to perfectly pedicured feet. "Where's Albert? Tell him that his mama is here to see him," she replied curtly. Sarah nodded and went to her bedroom to wake her husband. "Albert, wake up! You won't believe who is here to meet us." Albert rubbed his eyes and saw Sarah's nervous face. "Who is it, Sarah? Why do you look so nervous?" he asked Sarah. "Your mother is here," she replied in a low voice. Albert's eyes grew wide, and he ran out of the bedroom. When he saw Patricia waiting for him, his eyes welled up. "Mom, I missed you so much. I'm so happy you came to meet me." Patricia saw his son for the first time in 2 years. She also got misty-eyed and ran to hug her son. Sarah saw Albert and Patricia hugging each other, and she smiled. "Why are you smiling like a fool? Go fetch a glass of water for me. I'm parched and jet-lagged," she yelled at Sarah. Albert and Sarah were both shocked to hear Patricia yelling. But Sarah went to the kitchen to bring water for her tired mother-in-law. When she left, Albert told his mother, "Mom, Sarah is a nice girl. I would love it if you two could get along for me." Patricia smiled and said, "Son, I have decided to forgive you both on one condition." Sarah had returned from the kitchen and overheard the conversation between Albert and Patricia. "Patricia, Albert and I are ready to accept every condition, as long as it makes you happy." Sarah smiled and said to Patricia, "Well then, I want you to make me a grandma this year. I want to see the face of my grandson or granddaughter before I die," she said excitedly. Sarah and Albert were taken aback. They had no plans to have kids before becoming financially independent. "But Mom, we need some time before we have kids. Sarah and I have just started our careers. We need to settle down first before increasing our family." Albert smiled and tried explaining to his mother. Patricia looked at Sarah and Albert and started crying. "Oh, I guess I have to die without my last wish being fulfilled. I wanted to hold and see my grandson before cancer consumed me." "What cancer? Mom, what are you talking about?" Albert was anxious. Patricia wiped her tears and replied, "Yes, son. I am diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. I'm afraid I don't have many days to stay alive. That's why I wanted to mend things with Sarah and you," she explained to her son. That night, Sarah and Albert both decided to plan a baby to honor the wish of Albert's dying mother. However, after a few months of trying, the couple wasn't successful in conceiving the baby. Patricia told Sarah to visit her friend, Dr. Mary. "Mary is an expert gynecologist and expert in treating infertility. I'm sure she'll help you out." Sarah listened to her and responded, "Sure, Patricia. I'll visit her. I'm also forcing Albert to visit a urologist today to see if everything is fine at his end." Patricia's blood boiled at her daughter-in-law's words. "What do you mean? Albert is infertile? I am sure it's you who has a problem and not my son." She slammed the phone. Sarah was scared that she had upset her. Sarah went to Dr. Mary, and she ran some tests on her. Throughout the appointment, Sarah felt extremely uncomfortable with her. Dr. Mary was rude and made uncomfortable remarks about her body. "Look at your weak body. Do you really think that you carry a child and bear it? No wonder why you couldn't be a mother yet." Sarah stayed silent as she didn't want to disappoint her mother-in-law. "When will I get my reports, Dr. Mary?" Sarah asked before leaving. "Oh, you will get them by tomorrow," she replied with an evil smile. 2 days later, Patricia came to Sarah's apartment again. She had swollen eyes and looked disturbed. "Are you okay, Mom? What happened?" Albert asked. Patricia looked angrily at Sarah and burst out crying. "Oh, Albert, my son, you will never be a father, and I will never be a grandma." Tears were running down her cheeks. "What are you saying, Mother? I don't understand you." Albert was perplexed. Patricia opened her handbag and threw the reports at Sarah's face. "Your wife is infertile. She can never conceive and become a mother." Albert was shocked. He hasn't even imagined in his wildest dream that his wife wouldn't be able to bear a child. "Patricia, I'll go to another doctor. I'll get myself treated. You will get a grandchild," Sarah nervously replied to her mother-in-law. "Do you think I have that much time, huh?" She yelled at Sarah and then turned to her son. "Albert, I told you not to marry her. She wasn't the right fit for you. Now, see how she has ruined our lives?" Patricia fainted on the couch, and Albert rushed her to the bedroom. "Albert, I think we need to get her to the hospital," Sarah suggested to her husband, who was greatly upset. "Sarah, please get me some water. I'm sure she'll be okay once she gets enough rest. Also, please leave me alone for a few minutes," Albert requested her. Sarah left the room and went to the kitchen. She filled up a glass of water and gave it to Albert. She sat on the couch and started crying about her reports. She was living a happy life with a loving husband, and now her life was ruined. Her husband and mother-in-law were upset because she was infertile. Patricia slowly opened her eyes and saw Albert sitting beside her. "Son, please fulfill my last wish. Please divorce Sarah and marry Elena. If you don't honor my wish, I'll die of sadness before cancer kills me." She started crying again to weaken her son. "Mom, please don't cry. I'll marry Elena and give you a grandchild. I'll leave Sarah. Please stop crying," Albert assured her and left the room to talk to Sarah. As soon as he left, Patricia smiled wickedly. "My plan worked." She was happy that now Elena would become her daughter-in-law and get rid of Sarah. Patricia picked up her phone and called Dr. Mary. "Thanks for the fake reports. Albert is ready to leave Sarah." Albert divorced Sarah and married Elena the same month. He missed Sarah every second of his life and became bitter toward his new wife. He also learned that his mother was lying about cancer and she was perfectly healthy. He still believed that Patricia used his wife's infertility as an excuse to separate them, and he regretted his decision every minute. "Albert, I think we are ready for a child. What do you think?" Elena asked after 1 year of their marriage. However, they didn't succeed, and the couple engaged in frequent arguments. Being separated was devastating for Sarah. She couldn't believe that Albert had left her because of being infertile. She found herself slipping into depression and went to a therapist. She also decided to go to church to reconnect with God and soothe her pain. A year later, after her divorce, Sarah met a handsome and kind gentleman, Will, who volunteered at church on Sundays. He and Sarah started meeting more often and developed feelings for each other. He asked for Sarah's hand in marriage, but Sarah turned it down. "Will, you are a wonderful man, but marrying me will ruin your life as I can't be a mother," Sarah told Will, who smiled at her warmly. "Sarah, you are enough for me, dear. If you can't become a mother, we can always go for treatment or adopt a baby," Will explained to Sarah. The next month, the couple got married. They both were happy together until one day, Sarah fainted and was rushed to the hospital. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Will. You are both going to be parents," the doctor told them. Sarah and Will couldn't believe their ears and understood that Sarah was fooled by fake reports by her ex-mother-in-law. Sarah was over the moon to welcome a new life with Will by her side. She had understood that she was never infertile. It was Albert who had the problem and couldn't become a father. She thanked God for separating her from Albert and bringing Will into her life. 2 years later, Sarah was in the park with Will and their beautiful daughter, Diana. Albert was also there and was surprised to see Sarah fresh and playing with a girl in the pram. He decided to go and meet her. "Hello, Sarah. I hope you're doing good." Sarah was stunned to see Albert. He looked older and disturbed. "Hey, Albert. I am good. How are you?" she asked. "My wife and I separated because of constant arguments and incompatibility, but I am glad you moved on and adopted this beautiful baby. Albert replied as he looked at Diana. Will and Sarah looked at each other and smiled. Actually, Albert, she is our daughter, Diana. She's the best thing that happened to us. Will smiled and told Albert. He took the pram's handle and looked at Sarah. I'll give you two a minute while I start the car. Will left Albert and Sarah alone. I don't understand, Sarah. You were infertile. How could you have a daughter? Albert asked Sarah. She looked at him and said, I was never infertile, Albert. Your mother lied to us and created fake reports about my infertility. I never had a problem becoming a mother. I believe it was your fault. Albert was shocked to hear that his mother could stoop so low to ruin his son's life. Sarah, I apologize for everything. See, let's work things out. I have divorced my wife, you can leave Will, and we can start afresh with our daughter Diana, Albert told her desperately. Sarah looked at him angrily and replied, Albert, Diana is mine and Will's daughter, and I am not going to leave my loving husband who married me even when I told him that I couldn't give him a child. But you left me the day you saw those fake reports. I am thankful to Patricia for whatever she did. I found Will and got blessed with my beautiful Diana. Albert was crying inconsolably, and Sarah turned around and left towards her car. Albert was a nice guy. We had a good time. But when the situation got tough, he chose to abandon me. He could have reasoned with his mother and convinced her of the treatment. Yet, he decided to leave me for something over which I had no control. But I am glad I got to meet a strong man who loves me for all I am, she thought, while walking towards her car. She opened the door and sat beside Will, smiling at her lovingly.
Viva Fiesta! The loud parade passed in front of the house belonging to Jake. The drums rolled, the trumpets blared, and the colors of the costumes worn to honor the heroes that had given their lives in the Battle of San Jacinto made the morning an interesting one. It was early April. The autumn leaves had fallen, with the little green ones slowly spiraling their way into life. Jake stood by the window watching as young people jumped up and down, displaying acrobatic prowess while singing songs of victory. For a moment, Jake forgot he was close to 80 years old, as he saw himself as an 18-year-old once more, adorning the green uniform of the army. He had always loved the parade as it spoke of sacrifices, the ones heroes made and the ones he made for his country. Jake, you look excited, Martha said as she came to the window to peep out at the parade. Oh, yes, dear Martha. Jake likes to add dear to Martha's name. It makes her smile. He used to boast to her about how much of a great poet he was. He would then go off in a recitation while having his face animated like a teenager, knowing what love felt like the first time. This always sends Martha rolling. She came to see him as a family since she started working there. Old man Jake has 2 sons, both of whom are not always around. Martha didn't mind being with Jake all day, listening to him tell stories of the past and laughing at his jokes. She got paid, too, at the end of every month. Approaching 40 years, Martha is a geriatric nurse who practices privately. Old man Jake is one of the 4 clients she takes care of, and he is also her favorite. What could be the cause of the excitement? Martha asked. First, watching the fiesta another year in a row is one thing to be grateful about. You know, I fell down the stairs late last year. It was an excruciating hour before the ambulance arrived. And my sons who live with me? Well, an old man cannot ask for more, can he? He broke off with a distant look on his face. An old couple, both gray and waving the American flag, passed with the parade. San Antonio was witnessing another fiesta. It is a practice that has been upheld for more than a century. It would be 2 weeks of displays, parties, and fun. Old man Jake was already beginning to lose flavor in the loud things of life. Or could it be because of his sons? Martha wondered. She watched as he turned away from the window and walked back to his favorite settee. He is also one of the kindest men she met in a long time. His gray hair was packed in a little ponytail, while a golden-rimmed glasses sat on his nose. As evening came, Martha got ready to leave. It had been an eventful day with Jake, talking about the past and advising her about the future. He would always complain about how difficult the world has become for older people. Young ones for whom the old ones lived and fought so they would have freedom treated them bad. His two sons, whom he spent money on so they got an education, made things hard for him. They would leave the house every morning and only return in the evening. Whenever they came back, they headed straight to their rooms without as much as an exchange with Jake. This made his evenings lonely, so it was always sunny whenever Martha came around. One morning, 4 days into San Antonio Fiesta, Jake woke up happier than usual. He got out of bed himself without having to ring the bell that would bring a drowsy Liam to his bedside to help him out. Jake went straight to the kitchen and started making chicken fried steak. He also put some coffee beans into the coffee pot and waited for it to boil as he whistled an old tune. The aroma of the food saturated the whole house. This forced Liam and Elijah down the stairs to the kitchen. Elijah is the older of the two. At 42, he was unmarried, had been to prison twice, and worked in the local club as a bouncer. One would have thought that having been in prison would at least tame him, but it didn't. He still engaged in bar fights and came home drunk to his father. Liam, on the other hand, worked at the thrift shop. He had gone through a messy divorce 4 years earlier. The court granted custody of the 3 boys to his wife. "Dad, I can't remember the last time you cooked," Elijah said, taking a deep sniff of the kitchen. "I remember how he used to cook on Friday nights when Mother was still alive. Don't you bring my wife's name into—" Jake's voice trailed off. "But it's true," Liam insisted. "Of course it is. Rita also didn't allow me to cook on other days. She was a perfect wife and mother. Or was she? Because I keep wondering what happened to you both," Jake said as he arranged plates on the big table in the kitchen. "What are you trying to say, Dad?" Elijah asked, with his arms folded on his chest. "You know, ever since she passed on, both of you care very little about me. You hardly even know I exist here." Jake scooped some soup into a bowl. "Well, we have been busy, Dad. You know, chasing after the American dream. We can't possibly hang around an old man who only has stories from many years ago to tell." Liam dragged a chair and sat in front of the food. "That's because the stories are a part of you boys. Maybe if you had listened better, you would have heard me talk about the little garden behind the house." Jake poured himself a cup of coffee, took his position at the head of the table, and sat down. "We grew up here on the farm, Dad. What story would you want to tell us that we do not know about?" Elijah asked as he stuffed his mouth full of chicken fried steak. "Yeah, I have remembered the garden for as long as I've been here," Liam quipped in between blowing into his cup of coffee. Jake looked at the men and smiled. His eyes carried a glint that was not there in the past. Elijah looked at his father and back at Liam. He wondered what could be going on in his mind. He had never seen his father this excited. Jake brooded and would sit reading all day. He was glad when Martha started coming to the house to look after Jake. "There is something about that land, you know, the one that stretches past the garden. It smells of the tender grasses in the morning, the sunflower opening up towards midday and showing its yellowness to the sun, the hug of nature, and the general feeling of being in tune with the universe. A great battle took place on this land, just beyond the garden. It was a fierce battle, cannons boomed, and heaven received souls. It is called the Battle of San Jacinto." Jake went down history lane again. Elijah listened to his father talk, not because he wanted to. What bothered him, or was of interest to him in the story, was the way Jake narrated it. Then that glint in his eyes looked like one that just came upon a discovery. This kept him rooted to his chair. Liam, on the other hand, paid little attention to the story. He calculated how much he would make in the dog race later if he should go to the bazaar. Liam didn't like the part about donating money to charity in Fiesta, but he enjoyed taking from them in races and games that had stakes. Stories were rife about how a box containing gold and pearls with other rare metals was buried in the ground somewhere. My grandfather told my father how he bought the plot because of those stories. He had seen men come to great wealth by striking some hidden treasure. Jake paused dramatically to look at his children. He had their attention. "So," Liam asked. This was a stake more than he would ever get at the bazaar. He never found the treasure. If he never did, why are you telling this story? Liam, you can see why I don't listen to the old man talk. Elijah pushed his chair back. Don't you want to hear the end of the story? That's where the lessons always are. Jake motioned to his son to sit down. After the boy did, he continued. 3 days ago, I was working in the little garden, tending to the flowers and digging up weeds, when my shovel struck something hard. I know there are no rocks around, so I was surprised. I tapped it with my shovel and felt the same hardness, but this time there was an accompanying hollow sound. I dashed to the shed, got a pickaxe, and started digging. Truly, the box came up. I couldn't pry it open, and what gain would it be to me to have all that wealth when I have children who would use it better? The silence in the room was short. Liam was the first to reach his father, while Elijah collected the spoon from Jake and began to feed him. Liam raised his leg and began to massage his feet. Which part of the garden is the box buried in? Did you leave a sign for us to find it? Easy, boys, Jake said slowly. You're the first lot I am telling my discovery. Don't be in a rush. We have the whole day and many more days to ourselves. I don't want you fighting over the treasure when you finally discover it. So I sought the service of a lawyer and had everything written into my will. This means that aside from the house, you got to inherit something substantial. Martha came in that very moment. Jake pointed at her and said, Aside from me, she's the other person that knows about my arrangement with the lawyer. Elijah and Liam were flushed. They had written off Jake and were only waiting around to sell the house, split the fortune, and either gamble with it to gain more or move to another city. The revelation of the treasure was a game changer. Well, for me to call the lawyer when the time comes, you both have to take care of your father and make sure he is happy. I will be the judge, and if you do it well, you know what follows, right? Martha asked. That moment changed everything for Jake. Elijah and Liam broke their bank for him and made sure he enjoyed fiesta to the fullest. On the last morning of fiesta, Jake didn't wake up. He had passed on quietly in his sleep with a smile on his face, happy and fulfilled. The funeral happened at the cemetery with Elijah and Liam giving long eulogies. They spoke so passionately of Jake that Martha was almost convinced. The two of them looked sad and appeared to be grieving. But this changed the moment they got back to the house. Pop goes the champagne, and clink the glasses went. Both of them were beside themselves with happiness. As they settled down, Martha came in. Both of them rushed to her. Take it easy. The number of the lawyer is in this envelope, Martha said, handing over the envelope to them and walking out. A few seconds later, reality dawned. There was no will, no inheritance, and Jake had sold the house to Martha. Oscar was a reticent boy and was often teased at school, mostly because of the fact that he looked like a girl. He had pretty facial features, tenderness, calmness of voice, compliance, eternal anxiety, and this was what Oscar hated in himself. He lived in a small town where almost everyone knew everything about each other. There was a deep forest nearby, through which he often went to school, avoiding the school bus. He didn't like buses because of the bullies, and he dreamed of his own skateboard. The people in town did not like the Oscar's family either. It was all because of his father, who was an obsessive kleptomaniac. He would steal people's wallets, food, and even small furniture from their houses. Also, he was an alcoholic, because of which he would often involve in fights. Many teachers compared Oscar to his father, although he was completely different. Students in school would often call him names and set him up, throwing things at him. His clumsiness, modesty, and old shabby clothes were the topics for their ridicules. Long and lean body, red hair, freckles, and black eyes exacerbated the situation. His classmates would laugh at him, calling him a tiny red rat. Over time, Oscar himself began to feel like a rat, as if imitating the habits of this animal. He even became interested in biology and zoology, which described the behavior of various animals. A lowered look and a quick, clumsy gait amused his peers. They would trip the boy, throw small stones and food at, tore his clothes, spat, and even punched him in the stomach sometimes. There was the main bully in school named Duke, who was the leader of the entire school, including Oscar's class. He was famous for having a lot of money and for being the son of a very influential person. His dad often defended his son, paying him off with cash. Humiliating and beating Oscar was Duke's daily job. The whole class, as if under hypnosis, obeyed their notorious leader. Every day, Oscar suffered another attack from a pack of wild hyenas. Yes, Oscar compared them to hyenas. A regular holiday for him was considered the day when he was humiliated just verbally, without usage of physical force. One day, Oscar stopped attending school after Duke and his gang tore his new shirt, which his mother had bought with the last of her money. And because of the numerous blows, his body was covered with bluish bruises. The house in which the boy lived was old, the roof often leaked during heavy rains, and some household appliances did not work at all. There was little food for them to eat, and because of it, his sister and Oscar were skinny. Oscar's family was dysfunctional. It consisted of a mother and his 4 younger sisters. His father committed suicide after he learned he would have a boy. His mom worked several jobs to provide for her daughters and for Oscar. All the boy's clothes were in patches, which his mother carefully sewed. But even these patches managed to be torn off by his daily enemies. Skipping his classes, Oscar loved to sit in the woods on the soft moss and read romance books. He always dreamed of a real-life relationship with a girl. No one would cut off his dreams on soft like a cloud of moss. But suddenly he heard a low, vile chuckle. Turning around, he saw Duke's gang heading towards him. Oscar realized that Duke had a shiny, sharp knife in his hand. He wanted to run away, but it was too late. They surrounded Oscar from all sides, leaving him no chance to escape. After tearing all his clothes off and his favorite book to shreds, they almost completed their crime, having made a deep, sharp cut on the right pale arm. They left completely naked Oscar alone in the darkening forest. The predators fled, uttering incomprehensible cries. Oscar was in terrible pain and not well physically at all. He wept bitterly. A weak, skinny boy whose body was like a wounded doe lay in a ball on the fluffy moss. Crimson blood flew endlessly from his paresis. He lay in the cold, covered with the remains of his torn clothes, and did not think of returning home. But the advancing twilight forced the boy to get up and leave the dark forest. Oscar's mother greeted him with hugs and cried loudly. He didn't have any more clothes for the next day. A patched blue shirt, thin trousers, black old-worn shoes. That's all he had up to the moment. His mom got some clothes for him in a thrift store, but Oscar did not want to return to school, so later on, his mother decided to transfer him to homeschooling. Over time, Oscar became a grown-up, but his courage did not increase. He still remained gentle and fragile. In addition to everything, he feared visiting public places, as there was a high probability of meeting with Duke's gang. But Oscar never stopped dreaming about love. The guy worked part-time in the nearest library as a janitor. The saved money could be spent on his college education. He helped his sisters as much as possible, trying to bring the dwelling into a suitable condition. The grown-up guy tried to get acquainted with social networks, but all his attempts were in vain. One day, he received a message from a girl named Kelly. They began to communicate with a hint of a relationship. Over several months of their communication, their virtual friendship only grew stronger. Suddenly, there were some feelings sparkled between Oscar and Kelly. The emotions that overwhelmed Oscar were so strong that he decided to meet her in person. The city where Kelly lived was just as small as his, but the people in it were more balanced towards each other and didn't know Oscar. They met each other and soon they got married. They began to live together in a small house, which they rented with the money they earned. Oscar tried to make gifts, although they were not expensive, but the girl's eyes would light up even from them. This brought them some kind of exceptional emotional saturation in their relationship. Their love was reasonable and built on a solid friendship. She was his right hand in all aspects of their life. They knew each other's shortcomings and tried to deal with the difficulties along the way. Overcoming his fears, Oscar became stronger and stronger every day. From a skinny, clumsy boy, he grew into a stately, handsome one. Kelly was his true muse. Thanks to her, he found a good job and became self-confident. But some inner fears remained still. Oscar was afraid of guys and stout men who reminded him of the bully Duke. Kelly had the same personality as Oscar. She was gentle, shy, and fragile. At their first meeting, Oscar understood it and decided to start changing for good. Oscar would never stop to admire Kelly. She was a real example for him. Every time he would go crazy with her brown curly hair, smile, voice, and laughter. Even her sadness and mood swings seemed to Oscar as something native, beautiful. He supported and comforted her as much as he could. They complemented each other perfectly. Separately they were weak, but together they formed a whole universe. Kelly suggested getting a small tattoo in place of a scar from the sharp knife that Oscar received as a child. His new tattoo was sun-shaped, symbolizing a new bright stage in his life. Kelly dreamed of children, and Oscar hated them. From his school years, he had a trauma associated with his peers. He experienced a particular dislike for children, which later grew into a terrible phobia. Oscar was sure that he would be a bad example for children. He feared they would become as unhappy and weak as him. Kelly was already a mature girl with a good job and a house she bought with Oscar. She wanted to experience maternal feelings, but Oscar was categorically against it. She tried to convince him that he would be a good father, but Oscar did not want to accept it. Kelly and Oscar soon began to have disagreements because of the children. As a result, Oscar had a serious quarrel and decided to end their relationship with his lover. After separation, and due to the death of his mother, Oscar had to visit the city of his childhood. But now, he was no longer afraid to go out. He no longer hid in the forest as he did when he was a child. He even found out that the fates of those guys who bullied him in childhood were terrible. Duke's wealthy father was imprisoned for fraud, and the guy himself began abusing alcohol and drugs, leading to health problems and subsequent amputation of his limbs. Other classmates who also bullied Oscar under Duke's command lived very poorly. Their fate was typical. They got married, had many kids, and low-paying jobs. Their unfortunate lives were discussed in the small town. Oscar stopped being afraid of those guys. He even began to feel better than them. Indeed, he was handsome and self-sufficient. But now, his flaw was his endless sadness. He forgave the bully from childhood, but now he couldn't forget his love. Every day he would feel guilty about the quarrel that had happened with Kelly last time. Time passed, and he did not want to start a new relationship. Kelly was a goddess for him. He constantly thought only of her. He realized that he had acted foolishly. He was ready to change drastically and accept his foolishness, but he thought it might be too late, and his guilt might have brought the final verdict in their relationship. He didn't want to disturb Kelly, thinking she hated him. Suddenly, his phone rang. An unexpected call interrupted Oscar's sadness. It was Kelly on the phone. She began to sob bitterly, saying that she was ready to live with, even if it would cost her to live without having kids. Simultaneous thoughts reunited them. They were ready to trade for each other. Oscar now wanted to try being a father for Kelly's sake. They always felt each other as if some invisible thread connected them. Soon, Kelly became pregnant and gave birth to a boy, and a year later to another girl. After their children's birth, Oscar became even more fond of Kelly. He had solid fatherly feelings. He was ready to become more sociable for the sake of his children. And indeed, the love and care of both parents made it possible to raise healthy and intelligent children. Oscar felt warm and calm for the first time when he saw that his children began to make friends and actively communicate with each other. He often walked with his children and devoted all his free time to them. Although it was difficult for him to make it in society, he still tried to make their life happier and more colorful. Oscar began to communicate more with the children's fathers in school, went to football matches, and visited art galleries. That's how he started making friends. He was often complimented about his empathy, that he could understand almost any person to provide emotional support. His self-confidence grew each time. Soon, Oscar had a strong desire to communicate more and attend various events. As an adult man, Oscar understood he was a good father. He had a good, loving wife and worthy friends, and his past path was only an experience that helped him to understand himself and those around.